As Final Fantasy XIV made its victory laps on game ranking sites and the like, players who had now settled in the new world of Eorzea did so on 2 platforms. The future seems bright, but one of the platforms is already causing trouble. When Final Fantasy XIV was first announced back in 2009, it was heralded as the next big cross-platform MMO. This didn't really come as a big surprise to anyone. Square Enix had done so previously, with the first AAA MMORPG that ran both on PC and PlayStation 2, Final Fantasy XI. The announcement in 2009 declared the PS3 as the exclusive console platform, which made sense at the time. That was the current generation of consoles after all. When 1.0 launched on September 30th, 2010, it was released for PC only, with the PS3 version slated for release in March of 2011. But it didn't take long for anyone to realize that there would be no way for the PS3 to run the game in its current form. High-end PCs all over the world chugged along at subpar frame rates, while mid- and low-end PCs pretty much gave up after mere minutes. A PS3 stood no chance. But how could this have happened in the first place? Did they not know the limits of the PS3? Although we never really got a clear answer on this question, we do know a little bit. The game's engine is mostly to blame. Crystal Tools was used in Final Fantasy XIII, and although 13 had moments where frames would drop on the PS3, it did run relatively smoothly in what could be considered impressive environments and high-modeled characters for a PS3. Square Enix might have been under the impression that using Crystal Tools to run the game would be a safe bet, because it had already proven its worth in 13. But as we now know painfully well, there is a difference between an RPG and an MMORPG. Eorzea was a vast open world, whereas 13 ran in controlled environments, often ridiculed as a hallway simulator due to its mostly linear maps. Characters would also be way more prevalent in 14, as player characters would bring the world to life. The 6 characters on screen in 13 is nothing compared to a room of 30 individual characters with completely different gear and color combinations. Crystal Tools was a disaster for 14 and is considered one of the major reasons the game failed so dramatically. So, as Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 died and A Realm Reborn was being developed, time passed. A Realm Reborn would not release until August 27th, 2013. The era of the PS3 is coming to an end. The PS4 was announced as early as February 20th, 2013, and was slated for release in November the same year, mere months after A Realm Reborn was to be released. That's why the announcement for A Realm Reborn was so odd. It would release with support for both PC and PlayStation 3. Square Enix was adamant on keeping their promise. PS3 players would get to experience Eorzea, even if it was 3 years too late. Final Fantasy XIV would launch on a dying console. Square Enix reassured players that the game would be released on the PS4 as soon as possible, and they did offer free upgrades, but it was apparent that the game would have to scale back on what was expected from a next-gen cross-platform MMO to facilitate the restricted resources of the PS3. Square Enix had decided to make the game look and work the same on all platforms. This meant that all platforms had to conform to the platform with the least power. If you're a Final Fantasy XIV player, you've probably heard the term PS3 limitations before, and it mostly stems from the limited RAM of the PS3. Sure, the CPU wasn't very impressive either, but the RAM is perhaps the most important part of an MMO running on a console. The term can also be traced back to Final Fantasy XI, where the term PS2 limitations was actively used by the developers when players requested features to be added to the game. The excuse was used loosely to explain why they were unable to add certain features, often adding a lot of the requested features afterwards anyway. In 14's case, it all worked completely opposite. While all tech-savvy players knew the limitations of the PS3, Square Enix and the dev team refused to bring up the PS3 as a reason for features not being added to the game. Let's compare the PS4 and the PS3 to see just why it was so problematic for a modern game like 14. The PlayStation 4 had 8GB of GDDR5 RAM, with an additional 256MB allocated for background tasks. The PlayStation 3 had 256MB of XDR DRAM with an additional 256MB of GDDR3 video RAM, making up a total of 512MB of RAM. That's less RAM than the average smartphone at the time. The 512MB of combined RAM limited the amount of information that could be loaded in when entering an area. This includes terrain assets, NPCs, player characters, monsters, and the like. This was never a problem in 1.0 because the game ate RAM like candy, and thus had vast zones with no loading screens. To ensure the game ran smoothly on a PS3, Eorzea was sent to the chopping block. All city-states, which all used to be unified zones with direct connections to the overworld, were cut in two. LIMSALOMINSA became the most obvious victim of the cut, as the Aetheryte Plaza is in plain view from the upper decks and looks empty in A Realm Reborn due to the zone dividers splitting the upper and lower decks. Their outside connections were also cut, leading to a black loading screen when attempting to leave through any of the city-state gates. The overworld would also feel the wrath of the PS3. It would face big cuts and major shrinkage compared to their 1.0 versions. 1.0's overworld was large, but mostly empty. A Realm Reborn's overworld would become relatively small, but filled with more assets and life. However, despite shrinking the zones, certain limitations remained glaringly obvious. One of the biggest headaches that occurred between 1.0 and A Realm Reborn's optimization process seems to have been LIMSALOMINSA's overworld model. In 1.0, LIMSALOMINSA appeared as a fully textured model where every single boardwalk light was visible in the distance at night. LIMSA's model is actually very complex, consisting of a lot of individual and unique structures. The PS3's limited RAM is most likely the reason why LIMSALOMINSA now looks like melted ice cream. The PS3's RAM would also limit A Realm Reborn's HUD. This is obvious, as this would have to be loaded onto the RAM at all times. The game launched without a TP bar for other members in the party list. It would only show you your own. This was of course due to the PS3's lack of, you guessed it, available RAM. The list would go on, with issues relating to how many windows could be opened at any given time to the size of the inventory screen. Before A Realm Reborn launched, the alpha and beta tests were conducted. In the beta, the outfit for Odin was tested in-game. The gear had a long cape with what can only be described as cloth physics on it. As the game neared release, it was discovered that the PS3 was unable to adequately run the game if players wore the cape, so the cape was removed entirely. This is incredibly evident on the gear to this day, it just doesn't look right. It probably also goes without saying after showing LIMSALOMINSA here that the game's overall textures would take a big hit too. Despite all these limitations, Final Fantasy XIV was able to serve players with such great quality content they didn't really bother anyone, at least not in the first couple of years. But as time went on, the shadow of the PS3 grew larger. Although the PS3 was never mentioned as a reason by Yoshi P and crew, features that was sorely needed could not be added to 14. One of the most glaring evidences of the PS3 being problematic was when the devs tried to add TP bars for the rest of the party on the party list. The PS3 was already pushed to the limit when it comes to what it could show on screen at any given time, so to fit the TP bars on the list, they had to remove the party bonuses section at the top. And even with that feature removed, the TP bars could no longer display the actual numbers. That's not to say the game was unable to improve on existing systems. During 14's PS3 era, the game would see the introduction of the expanded inventory, a huge feat for the game and the console. The PS3 hobbled on for years. It survived the launch of Heavensward, which marked the first real divide between the two platforms. While the PS4 and PC would receive graphical updates, the PS3 would not. Near the end of Heavensward, the PlayStation 3 was struggling to keep up. Loading times would spike for the new zones, dungeons, and pretty much all instanced content in the game. The PS3 could not display the same amount of player characters as the PS4 and PC. The bells are tolling in the distance. In 2016, Square Enix finally announced that PS3 support would end with the launch of Stormblood. The expansion would end the era of the PlayStation 3 immediately. There would be no continuation of the game on the platform, upgrade or leave. As Stormblood finally launched, PS3s all over the world were denied access to Eorzea, and the game finally gets to expand its features. One of the biggest knock to the PS3 was a major update to the game's UI. More information could now be shown on screen, sub-menus increased, hotbars could have their shapes changed. With every patch, the technical setback caused by the PS3 is slowly being wiped out. Today, Final Fantasy XIV can enjoy a multitude of improvements, both graphically and technically. But we're all still waiting for the return of the Odin Cape. Please, I need it. Thank you for watching this episode of The Fall and Rise of Final Fantasy XIV. Now this was a bit of a sidetrack, but one that I felt we had to make before continuing our journey in A Realm Reborn. The PS3 will be mentioned a lot in the series' future in regards to updates and the like, so it's important that we're all up to date on exactly what the problem was. If you liked this episode, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more. I'll be back in the next episode of Fall and Rise. Until then, may you ever walk in the light of the crystal.